I've never really been one to believe in those ghost stories people love to tell, but after that night, I have to admit, there are things that simply can't be explained. This happened about 5 years ago, on a Friday. I was coming back from a work trip, exhausted, my head spinning from solving so many problems. The road was just a thin strip of asphalt cutting through a secluded valley, with dense trees and shadows that swallowed the headlights. I remember the GPS sent me on a detour because of some construction work, and with no other choice, I ended up taking a narrower path that crossed an old bridge, the kind that looks like it came straight out of a horror movie. The structure was completely corroded by time, with wooden planks creaking even in the wind. In the middle of the night, it looked like something out of a nightmare. As soon as my headlights illuminated the bridge, I saw something that made my stomach churn. Standing there, right in the middle of the crossing, was a figure, completely still. It was a person, or at least it seemed to be. They were wearing something dark and long, like an old coat, and had on a hat that hid their face. The headlights shone on them, but revealed no details, just a rigid silhouette that didn't move an inch. I sat in the car for a few seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. Maybe it was just someone lost or some crazy person, I thought, but who the hell stands there like that, alone, on a bridge at 2 in the morning? My heart started pounding, and a strange feeling took hold of me, like the air was getting heavier. I decided to get out of the car to see what was going on. It's not like I had much choice, since the figure was blocking my way, and it was impossible to turn around on that narrow road. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, trying not to show the panic that was already welling up inside me. As I approached, I felt the bridge tremble slightly under my steps, and the sound of my shoes on the old boards seemed to drag on longer than usual, like the echo was delayed. With each step, I was sure this person was staring at me, even though I couldn't see their face. "Hey, are you all right?" I called out, my voice shakier than I wanted, but the figure didn't respond. I kept walking until I was only a few feet away when suddenly, they simply vanished. They didn't walk off, didn't run, they were just gone, as if they had never been there. My heart felt like it was about to explode. I froze for a few seconds, just staring at where that figure should have been. The bridge was empty, but the air felt colder, and I caught a strange smell, something like iron or wet dirt. The feeling of being watched made me want to run, but my feet were glued to the ground. I headed back to the car quickly, trying to shake the paranoia that something was behind me. Once I got in and shut the door, I took a deep breath and pressed the button to lock all the doors. I started the engine, but before I could drive off, I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone: footsteps. They came from the bridge's wooden planks, rhythmic, heavy, getting closer. Only there was nobody there. The footsteps wouldn't stop. It was as if something invisible were crossing the bridge toward me, each step echoing in a muffled way inside the car. My chest felt tight, and my hands were shaking so badly I could hardly keep my grip on the steering wheel. I put the car in gear, ready to speed out of there as fast as possible, but it felt like the bridge planks were alive, each sound getting closer. By reflex, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and what I saw made my body freeze with fear. The figure was there again, now much closer to the car, yet still motionless, like a solid shadow. But something was different. Something was off about that silhouette. It seemed bigger, stretched in a way that defied logic, as if it had grown. Without a second thought, I hit the gas. The wheels spun for a moment, but the car soon lurched forward across the bridge, making the headlights jiggle and the shadows dance all around. The figure didn't move, but the sound of footsteps continued, now so close it felt like they were inside the car. It was impossible. I floored the accelerator, and when I finally reached the other side of the bridge, the noise stopped abruptly. It was as though the entire world had gone silent for a few seconds. I pulled over onto the shoulder, drenched in cold sweat, trying to catch my breath. I looked back one more time, and the bridge was empty, swallowed by darkness, as if nothing had happened. But then I noticed something that made me want to scream. There were handprints on the rear window, large, elongated, as though something really had tried to grab me as I fled. For a moment, I was completely paralyzed. The prints on the glass made no sense. There was nobody on the bridge, no one around, and yet there they were, plain as day, 5 long, disproportionate fingers pressed against the back window, as if something had slid its hands across it while I sped away. My whole body was trembling, but I had to get out of there. I started the car again and kept driving, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But as I continued down the dark road, a new feeling washed over me. I wasn't alone. With every turn, I felt as though I caught sight of something from the corner of my eye, a shape that vanished the moment I turned my head to look. The radio started giving off static, even though it was off. Suddenly, a dull thud, like something striking the roof of the car, made me slam on the brakes. The car stopped abruptly, and the road fell silent again. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and shone its flashlight outside the window, trying to see what it was. Nothing. I took a deep breath and looked in the rearview mirror once more, feeling panic completely overwhelm me. This time, there was no doubt. Something was sitting in the back seat. My breath caught in my chest. The cell phone light flickered in my hand, but I didn't have enough courage to fully turn around and face whatever was in the back seat. In the mirror's reflection, I could only make out a dark, hunched shape, as if it were almost glued to the seat. There was no face, just a dense shadow, impossible to ignore. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers started to hurt. The only thing I could think about was getting out of there as fast as possible. Without looking back, I slammed on the gas. The car jolted, and the figure seemed to move an almost imperceptible shift, like it was preparing to pounce. As the car picked up speed, I felt an immense weight in the air, as if something invisible were pressing down on my chest. Suddenly, a low, distorted voice like a whisper coming from inside my own head murmured something I couldn't understand. It was guttural, a blend of sounds that made me want to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look in the rearview mirror again, until, without warning, the radio static burst into a deafening noise. Panicking, I took the first turn I saw and somehow found myself back on the main road. The moment I crossed the intersection, everything stopped. The radio went silent, the air returned to normal, and the car seemed empty again. When I finally mustered the courage to check the rearview mirror, there was nothing there anymore. I got home that night feeling like I'd just come back from a battlefield. I don't remember parking the car or walking through the door. All I know is that suddenly I was in my room, sitting on my bed, my hands trembling, my gaze fixed on the floor. My body was there, but my mind felt trapped on that bridge, reliving every step, every sound, every sensation that something was following me. I stayed up for the rest of the night, watching the shadows in my room as if something might leap out at any moment. When the sun finally began to rise, I decided to go outside and check the car. I had to be sure it wasn't all just a nightmare or some kind of delusion brought on by exhaustion. At first glance, the car looked normal, but when I got to the back, my legs almost gave out. The handprints were still there, only now they were more visible, as though etched into the glass even after the morning dew. More terrifying still, they didn't look like someone trying to get in, but rather, from inside, as if something was trying to get out. I never took that route again, nor did I ever drive alone at night in deserted places. To this day, I avoid even going near old bridges. I don't know what that figure was or what it wanted with me, but one thing is certain, it's still out there, waiting for the next person who dares to cross that place. At the time, I was 27 years old and lived in a small town in rural Colorado. It was the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, and dirt roads were as common as paved streets. I worked as a substitute teacher at a local school, and on that particular day, I had just gotten off work after filling in for a science class. Since the weather was nice and I wasn't in a hurry, I decided to take a shortcut along a dirt trail that went through a more secluded area, surrounded by trees and open fields. It was one of those choices you make without thinking much, just because you want to break the routine. I liked driving there because it was peaceful, and the fresh air helped clear my head. The trail was deserted, as usual, but about 300 meters ahead, I spotted something on the ground near the side of the road. As I got closer, I realized it was a fallen bicycle, and next to it, a man lying face down. He was wearing tight cyclist clothing and a red helmet that looked slightly cracked. My first instinct was to stop the car. After all, who would leave someone lying there? The thought that he could be seriously injured made me rush out of the car, feeling that mix of adrenaline and concern. But as I approached, something started to feel off. It wasn't just the silence around me, but the body's motionless position. There was no groaning, no movement. And when I finally walked around to see his face, my stomach turned. There was no face. Where the nose, mouth, and eyes should have been, there was only a smooth, pale surface, like a blank, expressionless mask. I froze. I didn't know whether it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I took a step back, trying to process what I had just seen. The skin where his face should have been was completely smooth, without any trace of human features. It didn't look injured or deformed, but rather empty. My eyes started searching for a logical explanation. Maybe it was some bizarre mask, some kind of prank. But it made no sense. The body remained motionless, and there was no one else around. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt the urge to run back to the car, but my legs seemed stuck to the ground. With my throat dry and my heart in my mouth, I decided to summon the courage to call out to him. My voice came out shaky, almost a whisper. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" Nothing, no reaction. Not a single muscle moved. By then, a chill was creeping up my spine, and I had the unsettling feeling that someone was watching me. I looked around, but the trail was completely empty, except for me, and that thing lying on the ground. The silence was so profound I could hear my own labored breathing. When I tried to approach again, the body began to tremble. It wasn't a human movement. It was as if each limb were jerking independently, without any rhythm, like a puppet being manipulated by invisible strings. Before I could react, the body rose with a sudden and unnatural movement, as though pulled by something. Its arms hung limp, its shoulders tilted at odd angles, and its legs seemed bent in all the wrong places. Now it stood just a few yards from me, but it made no sound. It just stayed there, motionless, faceless, staring at me, or at least that's how it felt. I felt exposed, like something was scanning every inch of me. My whole body screamed at me to run, but I was paralyzed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely form a fist. That's when I noticed something even more bizarre. The skin where its face should have been seemed to pulse slightly, as though it was alive. Then it started moving toward me, but not in a normal way. Its steps were erratic, almost like it was stumbling, yet it came at me far too quickly. My vision began to blur, the world around me growing hazy, as if something was wrong not just with it, but with the place itself. I barely managed to turn around and run back to the car. Every muscle in my body felt as though it was fighting against an invisible weight, as if some force was trying to keep me there. When I finally reached the car door, my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the keys. By some miracle, I managed to unlock the door, throw myself inside, and lock it. Inside the car, my first instinct was to check the rearview mirror, and there it was, standing in the exact same spot as before. Only now, its head, if you could call it that, was tilted at a near impossible angle, almost like it was trying to see through the glass. My chest was heaving so fast it felt like it might burst. With trembling hands, I started the engine, and the sound of it seemed to tear through the silence like a deafening roar. When I finally shifted into reverse to get out of there, something hit the rear of the car. It was a dull thud, as if someone had slammed the vehicle with absurd force. I turned to look, and it was no longer where it had been. That was when I heard a scraping sound on the roof of the car. I could feel the weight, and the pressure made the car groan slightly. I don't know how I found the courage, but I hit the gas, the tires sliding on the dirt as I tried to get back to the main road. The noise continued, growing louder, until it finally sounded like something leaped off the roof and vanished into the trail behind me. But even then, I didn't stop. I drove like a maniac, almost losing control on a few bends until I reached the paved road. Only when I saw the first signs of civilization did I start to slow down. My whole body was shaking, and there was a strange taste in my mouth from grinding my teeth so hard. I got home and locked every door and window, still feeling like I was being followed. I stayed up all night, trying to convince myself it was some sort of hallucination, or that I was just too tired and my mind had played a trick on me. But that same night, when I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, I saw something that made me drop the glass. There were long, thin finger marks in the dust on the hood of my car, as though something had gripped it tightly before vanishing. To this day, I still don't know what I saw that day, and I've never gone back to that trail. I never told anyone about it, but sometimes I still dream of that blank face, standing by the side of the road, watching me. I never trusted GPS 100%, but that night, it was my only chance. My name is Alex, and this happened about 2 years ago on a work trip to a small town in rural Oregon. I had just accepted a new job, the kind that makes you spend nights away from home, traveling to places you can barely find on the map. It was November, and the night was cold, with that fine drizzle that fogs up the windshield and forces you to keep the wiper on the slowest setting. I was heading back to the hotel after visiting a client who was located in the middle of nowhere. My GPS, already updated, indicated a shorter route back to the main highway, so I decided to trust it. The road seemed normal at first, lined with tall trees, the asphalt somewhat worn but still drivable. I didn't see another car for miles, and the beams from my headlights barely lit the way ahead. The GPS kept repeating in its mechanical voice, "Turn right in 300 meters. When I made the turn, I felt an immediate chill. It wasn't exactly fear yet, but a strange discomfort, as though something wasn't right. The road got narrower and more winding, and the trees around me started to feel taller and more suffocating. I realized I hadn't seen a sign or any sign of life for at least 15 minutes. The GPS kept insisting, "Continue for 2 kilometers and turn left." Even with the growing unease in my chest, I kept going, thinking it was just my imagination. I was tired, and the last thing I wanted was to get lost in the middle of nowhere. That was when I saw that figure for the first time. In the distance, under the weak glow of the headlights, there was a woman standing on the shoulder of the road. She wore a long white dress, and a veil covered her face. My heart raced, but I tried to be rational. Maybe she was a local or someone who needed help. As the car got closer, she lifted one of her hands and waved, a slow, almost robotic movement. My instinct told me not to stop, but my foot hesitated on the gas pedal. It felt like, for a second, she looked right at me, even though I couldn't see her face under the veil. I drove past, keeping my eyes on the road. Still, the rearview mirror showed her figure fading behind me, motionless, with her hands still raised. My heart was pounding, and I tried to convince myself it was just a bizarre coincidence. Strange people show up in strange places, right? But the uneasiness didn't go away. The GPS, as if it were indifferent to what I had just seen, repeated, "Continue for 1 kilometer and turn left." The road felt tighter now, almost like a tunnel of trees that muffled the sound of the rain and the engine. When I made the next turn, I noticed something that made me tap the brakes. It was the same woman, in the same white dress and veil covering her face, standing by the roadside. Only this time, she was closer to the pavement, as if she had moved several miles in a matter of seconds. My stomach dropped. It was impossible. The feeling that something was profoundly wrong grew so strong it felt physical, like the air around me had become heavier. She didn't wave this time. She just stood there, staring at me, or so it seemed, even though I still couldn't see her eyes. Recalculating route, the GPS suddenly said, its cold, monotone voice sounding far more threatening than I remembered. It started directing me to another turn up ahead, but I hesitated. I thought about turning back, but I was so disoriented I was afraid I'd make things worse. That's when I noticed something even stranger. My cell signal had completely vanished, and the GPS map seemed frozen. The woman was still there, motionless, as if she were waiting for me to make a decision. I felt like I was being watched, like we weren't alone on that road. I decided to keep driving, but now my hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and my heart seemed to pound so loudly it drowned out even the sound of the engine. With every turn, my anxiety grew, and I caught myself checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, as if expecting to see that woman running after the car. The GPS kept insisting I move forward, but the road seemed endless. With each passing kilometer, I felt I was getting farther and farther from civilization. There were no streetlights, no signs, no indication that this road actually led anywhere. That was when it happened. As I turned a particularly sharp corner, the headlights illuminated something that made me slam on the brakes so hard the car almost skidded. The woman was now standing in the middle of the road, right in my path. Her veil swayed gently in the wind, and for the first time, I noticed she was holding something in her hands. It looked like a small wooden box old, with carvings I could barely make out from a distance. My brain tried to process everything quickly, but nothing made sense. Who was she? How had she gotten there so fast? My entire body screamed for me to reverse and get out of there. Yet at the same time, I couldn't take my eyes off her. With trembling hands, I put the car in reverse, trying to stay calm. But that was when I heard something that froze me to the bone, a dull thud, as if someone had tapped the back of the car. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there, or at least nothing I could see. The GPS, which had been stuck until then, suddenly announced with an unsettling clarity, "You have arrived at your destination." I held my breath. What destination? I was in the middle of nowhere, with that woman blocking my path and something invisible touching my car. Without thinking twice, I accelerated, swerving around the woman. I passed by her with my heart in my throat, feeling a mixture of panic and relief. But as the car moved forward, something made me look at the passenger seat, maybe a reflection, or just instinct. I nearly lost control of the steering wheel when I saw that the same woman, veil and box in hand, was sitting there, motionless, as if she had always been in the car. I screamed so loud my voice echoed inside the vehicle, but the woman didn't move. She only turned her head slowly toward me, the veil swaying with the movement. What I saw beneath it will haunt me for the rest of my life. There was no face, just a dark void, like a hole that seemed to extend beyond what my eyes could perceive. My body froze, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. But then she raised the wooden box and lifted the lid. There was no sound at all, but the sensation was immediate, like a wave of ice coursing through my body, paralyzing every muscle. Everything around me blurred, and the dashboard lights began flickering frantically. That was when something snapped inside me. I jerked the steering wheel sharply and drove the car off the road, down an embankment full of shrubs and mud. The impact was brutal, and the world spun as the car rolled over a few times before coming to rest on its side. By some miracle, I was alive, cut and bruised, but alive. When I looked at the passenger seat, the woman was gone. There was no trace of her, or the box, or anything else that might explain what had just happened. I dragged myself out of the car, groaning in pain, and started climbing back up the embankment to the road. The rain had intensified, and the cold cut through my skin like blades. When I finally reached the asphalt, the road was empty. No sign of the woman or any movement whatsoever. My phone miraculously started working again, and I managed to call for help. When the police arrived, they seemed skeptical of my story. They told me I had probably taken an abandoned road, and that I must have hallucinated due to exhaustion and the accident. To this day, I don't know what really happened that night. I never used a GPS again, and I avoid driving at night, especially on deserted roads. But sometimes when I'm alone in the car, I feel like I'm not truly alone. And every now and then, I hear a soft sound, like a faint knock on the car's body, and I feel that same chill snake down my spine.